Welcome to Draconian, your podcast for news and updates in Hong Kong and Taiwan. I'm your host, William.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 33 of the Draconian podcast. This is your host, William. This week's episode will be the last regular episode before a prolonged pause due to the Article 23 in Hong Kong. This episode was also postponed because of the threat that the host is facing due to Article 23. With the host currently based in Hong Kong, this will be the last episode that will be recorded before possibly leaving the city. This podcast was originally a side project for my studies in the UK about Taiwan, as I was accepted in the SOAS about Taiwan studies but did not have the funds to do so. Continuing this podcast and basically launching this podcast had been a roller coaster ride for me, but almost end considering the fakeness of national security in Hong Kong and the threat of just being in the city. With much thanks, but this was sadly the end of this chapter. Now back to the podcast items about Hong Kong and Taiwan, as this week's topics will be about Hong Kong's Article 23 and two cases in Taiwan, or two news topics in Taiwan. One of them is about a child abuse case, and the second one is about how the Taiwan legislature's president, Han Kuo-yu, had triggered a domino effect of unintentionally taking away the rights of legislators to question the administration. Let's start now. So now, let's start into Hong Kong's Article 23. So this was passed yesterday, and basically this was also the reason for this podcast to be postponed for a day, as the host is basically evaluating the risk of continuing this podcast within Hong Kong. And this basically had been a very quick passage of this law, considering that this law was originally got into the Hong Kong Gazette just 2 weeks just in the Friday before, while basically immediately got passed its first reading and getting a second reading, while at the same time getting into the stage where basically the legislators will be able to so-called read or so-called discuss the details of the law itself. However, the speed of this whole passage was so fast that the Hong Kong's Legislative Council had basically not been forced, but voluntarily extended its work hours to Saturdays and Sundays while working non-stop from 9 a.m. to basically end of the day. And even when this whole law was placed in the Gazette, for the Hong Kong's Gazette, for the discussion, it had actually been a very controversial statements had occurred, and basically foreign media had been accused by the Hong Kong government of spreading fear, as basically they're saying that they are not going to ban Telegram or some other channels like that. However, the risk is here, and that is also the main reason for the discontinuation of this podcast. The ambiguity of this law and the interpretation of the law, and basically all the discussions, all the recommendations by various citizens, including a complete ban of Telegram, Facebook and WhatsApp and etc., had triggered not only fear but panic within Hong Kong society. Even when Bloomberg had issued a statement, basically issuing an apology on this wrong statement, the damage had been done. As the government actually did not, although it had said it had no intention to ban any social media, the real effect is that they are actually doing so, and by doing so, it had caused much more harm than expected. Furthermore, the Article 23 had also been discussed in quite a lot of sense, including the idea of public immunity, or for the public good, or rationale as a rationale for the public good, while in fact none. Or in fact, basically the whole discussion had been problematic at best, and at worst, basically just as an echo chamber within the Legislative Council to affirm the support, to affirm to somehow, whatever we consider that as hijacking the support or hijacking the opinion of citizens that are still in the city. Foreign governments had also expressed their huge concern on this whole issue, considering they are actually actively evaluating, including the United States, actively evaluating the law itself and how it affects American citizens and American companies while operating in Hong Kong. In fact, it is the ambiguity and the expansion of powers that the police had creates problems or basically created most concerns, as we are also seeing some diplomatic encounters also appearing even when there is this even when the law was not implemented but is only in the discussion stage. In fact, the local legislature have actively been explaining the main reason for doing this Article 23, as basically they are citing other foreign governments having similar laws while omitting the fact that those are selected by people in a manner that is not a selection. It is a genuine election. So that is the main reason for the finale of this whole podcast, Article 23. As actually, the host would actually hope to observe both Hong Kong and Taiwan, but with one arm of the podcast being literally trimmed or being cut in half, it is impossible for the host to continue. So this is all about Hong Kong, and it's rather short, but that is the main reason, as basically the city itself have been in a long discussion about Article 23. Even as law scholars had explained, has basically expressed their concerns about how the law was written, and even when foreign government has stated that the law itself is the worst case scenario, or is the worst case interpretation, writing, and at the same time is the worst law that would be able to taking the worst parts of the laws from US, Canada, China, and Hong Kong's colonial law in suppressing sedition. So this was all about Hong Kong itself, and next it will be about Taiwan. So for this part about Taiwan, there will be two main topics that happen within the city or within the island. The first topic is about, as I've said, is about a child abuse to death case, while the second will be about the legislative yuan's issues. So first, back to the child abuse case. So a child was killed by his nanny, in late December last year. This case happened in the child itself, himself, was originally born in New Taipei City, but was transferred to Taipei City because of some administrative reasons. However, after the transfer, the child would not be able to see or would not be able to find or connect with his original guardian. In fact, the guardian was changed to another guardian within Taiwan's own system for hosting these unaccompanied minors. Next, bruises happened in the child in late last year, as mild bruises turned into much harsher bruises, and the child's health and the mental health and physical health deteriorated. Teachers and social workers have been actively looking into the case, but only was to be turned into a cold back by the new guardians, whom was turned out to be the main attackers and the main abusers of the so very unfortunate child. In fact, this whole case, even after his death, it was originally scheduled, and basically it was originally needed to be reported to the social welfare department in Taiwan, in Taipei, while at the same time, according to the standard operating procedures in Taipei cities in managing these issues, they would actually need to host an internal discussion, host an internal conference, or somewhat a conference, on discussion and discussing this death case. However, this discussion never took place. In fact, even until now, even until this case was revealed to the general public, they still had not hosted this discussion. So actually this created a very large backlash, as the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's government had pledged for a social safety net. And considering this case was revealed at the same time when the new Taipei cities had been found of abusing the records and forging records about new social workers, while it effectively had not. Basically, those were just not social workers at all, or they just don't work. They started work in the end of December and ended this contract on the early January. So it created a lot of too much anger. It created a lot of anger, considering this was a case where the new parent or the new foster parent was considered a socially privileged person, while one was working in a religious organization, while the other was basically doing the same, doing similar work. And they're actually using these reasons as a rationale of them basically treating the child well, while the fact was clear, they didn't. At the same time, it also revealed some of the incompetencies of the social worker, as they were originally scheduled to host monthly visits with the child. However, the last record for the visit of the child in question actually happened in September, while there were actually no real discussions or no real visits by social workers because of strained social resources. At the same time, it also involved the kindergarten and the hospital. For the kindergarten themselves, the teachers actually observed how the child became much less active after they were assigned a new foster parent. And as a result, when they questioned the nanny, what happened was that they just stopped getting the child to school or to the kindergarten. It was not until late December, when the child was sent to hospital for emergencies, that they have found such bruises. And in fact, even getting into ICUs for the child, they couldn't rescue the child, and the child died, unfortunately, in the end of December. This was considered a very sad incident, and basically the whole issue and whole thing created a lot of backlash. This was originally scheduled and was scheduled to be discussed in the Legislative Yuan about the child protection policies of the current government. However, the legislator who chaired the meeting had been leading the organization whom the unfortunate child was was processed by them by the organization. This created a lot of backlash, and basically created a lot of discussions, a lot of attacks, abuses, and etc. within the Taiwan itself. As the Greens, the DPP themselves, used this to attack the Chinese Kuomintang of letting this whole thing happening, considering the legislator was a legislator who chaired the council of chaired the meeting would be the CEO or the executives, not CEOs, but the executives of the organization involved. So this was quite sad, considering this whole thing was here. Hope the child could rest well. They hope them can have a good afterlife, and hope them would not face any abusive parents if there are. The next one would be about the Legislative Yuan's president, Han Kuo-yu. So last Friday, it was a regular questioning time. Basically, it was a regular questions to the executive branch of the government, while everyone would have a time for questioning, or every legislator would have the opportunity to question them. However, after quite some laws, quite some discussions, quite a lot of attacks, quite a lot of after one morning, basically they hoped to have lunch. So they got lunch. One legislator got postponed her questions to after lunch, and then because of her previously schedule clash, as she originally decided, or she originally was told to question in morning and had actually other activities to do in afternoon, as she actually holds a regional seat. So she decided to change her questioning, her questioning time to become a not an oral questioning, but a written questions. Next, basically after this whole issue happened, it affected not only Kuomintang legislators, but mainly affected legislators that are connected with the government, or as a ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party. As Han himself, after seeing the legislator who was originally scheduled after him did not appear because of them actually need to have time to react on this, it's triggered a domino effect of basically skipping all other legislators for that day, who opted to use like oral questioning. So in fact, it created a lot of backlash, considering basically for the Greens, for the DPP themselves, they actually are telling them saying that they are attacking the other people. They are using this to, in some cases, they have even said that just because of the DPP, the Chinese Kuomintang had created enough materials for them to create TikTok scripts, that they have decided to remove or delete the right of the legislators in the ruling party to ask their questions. So this whole thing triggered a large backlash, not only within the party themselves, but also amongst a lot of other people, as the original idea, or as the original means of dealing with such of like legislators skipping the questioning would be basically having a short break, so that if there are any other legislators need to question them, they can basically have time to walk from the offices to the room or to the main hall. This was not followed. This not a rule, but this basically method of dealing with such incidents was not followed, and triggered a very interesting collapse of basically no one would be able to question the legislative yuan, not the legislative yuan, but the executive yuan, or the executive branch of the government, just because of this very interesting thing. So the next thing, or the next day, or even at that day, it created a much backlash in the ruling party, as basically it is the leader of the legislative yuan removing the right of questioning, or the constitutional right to question the executive branch. So this was actually quite interesting, and quite in some cases, it can be considered a joke. In fact, it is a joke, and in fact, it had actually also created quite a lot of backlash, even in the not the ruling, but the managing party, the Chinese Kuomintang. As basically this was a norm for the legislators not to sit in the main hall, because they need to prepare their materials, may need to have events, may need to call up conferences or call up press conferences, so as to trigger or to reject the voice outside. So the whole event took into a much collapse, and basically this was a very interesting example of how they are following the rules, but in a very interesting manner, or in an incorrect manner, as basically the right for questioning is the right and is the main task, not the main task, but it's one of the main tasks for them to actually carry out their daily activities, and in some cases their only opportunity to raise concerns for their constituencies. As a result, in this whole discussions, this is a result. No good thing, or in this case is that there are just no or missing rights in here. This is actually quite chaotic, and at the same time also quite problematic, as this not only affects the rights of individuals to discuss matters, or to the rights of legislators to raise questions to the executive branch, it also created a very bad example of an unintentional abuse of power. It had actually also created concerns for whether Han would be able to carry out his activities in a neutral and non-biased manner. As a result of all these discussions, the affected individuals or the affected legislators actually filmed the legislative hall or the main hall, saying that they are just following the norm because of how the Chinese Kuomintang are attacking them. So as a result, this whole incident got into a very interesting result, or got into a very interesting end, and basically it created a very bad precedent. But seems that the discussions within the Taiwan society will be like, see how they are abusing, not how they are not exercising their power well, and for every single time that for them to not exercise their power well, it actually creates much more backlash for the general public. So also the general public will also be much more notified and have much more information about this whole discussion. So yeah, so basically these are the main events that happened in Hong Kong and Taiwan last week. We hope you'll find this episode informative. I hope you actually not. I'm considering that Article 23, but But if you do, please subscribe. Not subscribing, considering this is actually the last episode of the podcast. But if you still have any feedback for us, please let us know in the comments or drop us an email at william@draconianpod.com. Thanks again for listening. Have a safe, happy, and prosperous week ahead. And for listeners that are based in Hong Kong, stay safe and stay happy. Goodbye.